What's up, friends? Today I want to share with you the top 22 books that I want to read this year. This is not to be confused with my most anticipated releases for the year. At the time of filming this video, I don't even know what's coming out in 2022. I haven't looked it up, and I don't know that I'll be doing a most anticipated releases video anyway. So these are just the books that, for whatever reason, I haven't gotten to yet, and I really want to this year. Some of them are 2021 releases, some of them are older, some of them are from authors I just really want to try out. Regardless, I want to prioritize them this year, and because 22 books are a lot, and if you know me, you know that I don't know how to stop talking, we're just gonna get it right into it. And this is in no particular order. The first book is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. I've mentioned Stephen Graham Jones on my channel before, I think during the Indigathon readathon that I did. I have read both The Only Good Indians and Mongrels by this author, and I loved both of them so much. This is his latest book, which follows a girl who's obsessed with horror movies. They're her one and only escape in an otherwise lonely and traumatizing life. When weird events start happening around her town, she realizes pretty quickly that they parallel the tropes and common plot events of her favorite genre. This has been described as a love letter to the slasher genre, and I've heard that the narration style is pretty interesting, including some essay-style portions written by the main character about horror movies and things like that. I'm not personally a huge horror movie person. I don't know a lot about slasher movies, so I'm kind of worried that a lot of the references in history is going to go right over my head, but I love Stephen Graham Jones, so I'll read anything he writes. Book number 2 is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I feel like BookTube really went wild with this trilogy back in 2020, and I just want to be in the loop. This is a military fantasy inspired by real events that happened in 20th century China. We're following our main character, Rin, who has just passed an empire-wide test and gone into the most elite military school, to the surprise of everyone, including herself. Rin is targeted in her school for everything from her skin color to her poverty, but when she discovers that she has some rare shamanic powers, Rin realizes that she has to learn how to harness those powers and control them in order to not only save herself and survive the school, but more importantly, to save her people from the looming Third Poppy War. This book intimidates me, not gonna lie. It's a thick book with a lot of military and strategy plot lines that are probably gonna require a lot of focus from me in order to follow along with it. The Red Rising series also had a lot of strategy and battles, and I loved that series, so I hope I'll do well with the Poppy War. I do want to read this nonfiction book that I think is called The Rape of Nanking beforehand, because some booktuber, I think Mel Reeds was the one who said that it provides a lot of context for the events that inspired this book. I would love to read that first in order to better understand what R.F. Kuang was going for. The third book is Gearbreakers by Zoe Hanamikuta. This is a sapphic story about mecha deities. Our main character, Eris, is a gearbreaker who specializes in taking down wind-ups, which are giant mechanized weapons used by the world's oppressive overlords. One day, she gets thrown into prison where she meets a wind-up pilot named Steelcrest. The official synopsis says a little bit more than that, but I'm gonna leave it at that because I feel like the official synopsis says way more than I would have wanted to know before going into the story. I think it's a better experience if you just know that it is a sapphic sci-fi fantasy story with mecha weapons. Like, what more do you need to know? It sounds super cool. Number 4 is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. You may have heard of this one before. I think it came out just last year, and it's been compared to Mulan in the official synopsis, which I think was a selling point for a lot of people, myself included. Although recently I've heard that comparing it to Mulan is just a mistake, not really accurate, regardless of whether or not the comparison is good. The synopsis sounds good and I want to read it. Basically, this is a fantasy reimagining of China's Ming Dynasty. We have a peasant family with 2 children who are given vastly different fates. The brother given the fate of being great, whereas his more clever sister is given the fate of nothingness. But when bandits attack, it's the brother who ends up dying, and his sister assumes his identity in order to enter a monastery as a young male novice and escape her own fate. Book number 5 is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Everyone that I've seen pick up this book raves about it. I've heard it compared to telenovelas, and honestly, what more could I want than a book that embodies the energy of telenovelas? Our main character, Nina, has just debuted into society, but it becomes a disastrous event because of her haphazard telekinesis powers. Nina is really struggling with her powers when another telekinetic Hector comes into town and just dazzles her. With Hector, Nina develops her powers and ends up falling for a man who has secrets that may just threaten everything. The only other book by Silvia Moreno Garcia that I've read was Mexican Gothic, and it was a bit of a miss for me. I feel like that was more on me though, and it's just not the style of book that I really enjoy. She has so many great ideas and premises, and I've heard that all of her books are wildly different from each other, so I'm hoping that this one will work better for me. Number 6 is Winter Keep by Kristen Cashore. This is the latest book in the Graceling series. I can't even explain to you how surprised I was to hear that this book was coming out in 2021 because it's been, I don't know, 8 years since the original trilogy came out, but I'm super excited about it. I feel like Graceling is one of the only YA series from the 2000s era that still holds up today. The villain at the end of the trilogy is probably still one of the most realistic and sinister ones that I've seen in YA. Obviously, I can't say too much about Winterkeep, but this series takes place in a fantasy world where people are sometimes given a grace, which is essentially just an extreme skill. And this skill can be in anything. Sometimes it's harmless, maybe their skill is just that they're really good at swimming, but our main character in the very first book, Graceling, is graced with the ability to kill. Winterkeep is supposed to take place 4 years after the original trilogy. I've got high hopes. I'm also really scared about being let down because I don't know that it's a good idea to return to the series after so long, but I'm gonna read it either way. Number 7 is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This one also got a lot of hype on book 2. This is a Romeo and Juliet retelling that takes place in a fantasy version of a 1920s Shanghai, and the amount of buzzwords in that alone, great, love it. We've got a blood feud going on between two gangs, we've got a fantastical contagion spreading throughout the city, and we've got a lovers to enemies to hopefully lovers again plotline going on. What more is there to say, honestly? Number 8 is All's Well by Mona Awad. This is a horror thriller book following Miranda, whose entire life and acting career has been derailed after an accident that left her with chronic pain. She's now on the verge of losing her job as a college theater director and is hoping to put on a play that will save her entire career. But when the students rebel against her choices, Miranda turns to 3 strange benefactors who promise to help her out. Sounds like a really standard synopsis, but standard is not what I'm expecting. If I had just read the synopsis, I don't know that I would have been interested in it, but I've read Bunny by Mona Awad, and that was the weirdest thing I have ever read. Alright, I've also read Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford, so maybe not the weirdest thing, but it was a really weird book, so I want to try more of Mona Awad's writing, see what else she comes out with. I'm sure that this is a lot stranger than it sounds. Number 9 is Iron Widow by Shiran J. Zhao. This is a sci-fi fantasy inspired by historical Chinese figures. It's taking place in the middle of a war with mecha aliens. And it now occurs to me that I have several books inspired by Chinese events and time periods, and also several books involving mecha creatures of some sort. A pattern, I guess. Anyway, people fight these aliens using giant robots called chrysalises. However, only boys are actually allowed to pilot them. Each male pilot is paired up with a concubine pilot, a girl who most times ends up dying because of the mental strain of her position. Our main character volunteers to be a concubine pilot with the intention of murdering the pilot responsible for her sister's death, which she does in a way that strikes fear into society because she has figured out a way to power chrysalises by sacrificing boys instead of girls. Again, everyone who's picked up this book has also been raving about it. I've heard so many good things, so of course I've got to pick it up. Apparently there's also a polyamorous relationship, which would be really cool to read about. I don't think I've read a book with a polyamorous relationship before. Number 10 is Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Nouvel. Years prior to the events of this book, our main character Rose falls to the earth into a hole covered in glowing marks, and when firemen come to rescue her and look down into the hole, all they see is Rose sitting on the palm of a giant metal hand. 17 years later, Rose is on a team of physicists working to crack the code of the glowing marks. I think I first heard of this book on Yasmin Reed's channel, and the way she just spoke about it, it sounded so cool, it sounded so good. I think Rachel from Let Me in the Library also has good things to say about this book, so I can't wait to read it, and I heard that the audiobook is a really good experience for it, so if I can, I'll pick it up in that method. Number 11 is another spacey book. It's The Three-Body Problem by Liu Cixin. If you've ever thought about all of the signals and information that people on Earth send out into space and wondered what would happen if somebody actually got that information, this is the book for you. An alien civilization does actually get the messages that Earth has been sending out and decides to invade our planet, all while the people on Earth are divided between fighting back or helping the aliens out. Number 12 is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, which follows Keiko, a 36-year-old woman who has been happily working at the same convenience store for 18 years. For Keiko, working at the grocery store just makes sense to her. This is a place where she understands the rules of social interaction and how to be a normal person. But everyone around her thinks that she should be changing her life. They keep pressuring her to start a real career, find a husband, all of those things society deems normal. This book sounds really different from the things I typically read. I can't really explain why it's just stuck in my mind, but I really want to read it. I think it'll be an interesting character study. Number 13 is Wilder Girls by Rory Powers. This is a YA horror book that takes place in a girls' boarding school, which has been under quarantine for 18 months at this point. From what I've heard, the plague that's been spreading around the school results in a lot of body horror elements, and our main character has to break the quarantine to find a friend who's gone missing. Although this book is labeled as LGBT, so maybe that friend is more than a friend, I'm not sure. I've just heard that this is a sapphic story story. I do know some people have said that they want to avoid this book or that they're just not in the right mental headspace to read it, considering we've all been through our own quarantine now, but honestly, I'm the type of person to lean in instead. I don't think I even heard of this until after COVID-19 became an issue, and I've wanted to read it ever since, especially because of the situation we're in. Number 14 is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is a fantasy story inspired by the civilizations of pre-Columbian Americas. It opens up with an approaching celestial event that's supposed to mark the unbalancing of the world. Our main character, Ciala, has the powers of a siren, I'm assuming just based on the way she's been described in the synopsis. Sounds like a siren to me. And she is in charge of a ship that's carrying one passenger who's been described as harmless. And I really love the last line of the synopsis, so I'm just gonna read it to you verbatim. As Ciala well knows, when a man is described as harmless, he usually ends up being a villain. This is a book that I was vaguely interested in, but not much more than that until a number of my friends read the book and loved it. They raved about it. I am easily influenced, so here it is. Number 15 is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is actually the first occasion where it's more about the author than it is about the specific book. I just want to read one of Tiffany D. Jackson's books this year, if not more of them. I've heard nothing but good things about her. Grown just happens to be the one that I think most intrigues me. From what I've heard, this book has an overarching commentary on the manipulation and abuse of women in the music industry. Our main character, Enchanted, is a teenage girl who's just been scouted by a legendary R&B artist named Corey. But Enchanted wakes up the next day with no memory of what's happened and blood on her hands. Corey is dead and Enchanted has no idea what has happened. I love a mystery, I love a thriller, I love women protecting themselves, which is what I think this is, although I could be wrong. Number 16 is Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner, which is the only nonfiction book on this list. This is a memoir about growing up Korean American, losing her mother, and forging her own identity. Yes, that is straight from the synopsis, but you know what? Sometimes they do a good job of being concise about it, so. I've heard that this is a very emotional book. I've heard people really relate and cling to the themes of grief in the story. Personally, I think it's the discussion of identity that's going to do it for me. The synopsis mentioned, you know, the feeling of losing her Korean identity and then reclaiming it, and I think that's what I'm gonna most relate to, but regardless, I've heard people say good things about this memoir, and you know, sometimes I'm in the mood for a nonfiction. Number 17 is The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reed. Our main character here is an outcast in her village because of her lack of powers, which is very funny to me because I feel like it's usually the other way around. When soldiers arrive demanding to be given a girl to sacrifice to the king, the villagers betray her right away and hand her over. However, when the soldiers are attacked, she is the only one left alive, along with the captain, who turns out to be the disgraced prince. An unlikely alliance forms between them as they decide to band together to thwart plans for a coup and violent rule. This has been compared to Spinning Silver and The Bear and the Nightingale, neither of which I have read, but both of which I have heard reviews for and sound like they are up my alley. I've heard they're atmospheric and I live for atmosphere. And I'm also very intrigued by the fact that this is inspired by Hungarian history and Jewish myths, neither of which I have seen as a foundation for a story before. Number 18 is Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Boulet. I don't even know how I haven't read this book before. It was in my anticipated releases video for last year too. This is a YA thriller book following an indigenous girl named Donis who dreamed of studying medicine until she had to set all of that aside in order to take care of her mother. On the bright side, she meets and falls for Jamie. On the less bright side, things aren't adding up with Jamie. He is definitely hiding something. And suddenly Donis witnesses a murder and has to go undercover using her knowledge of chemistry and traditional medicine to help along her own investigation. I don't have much else to say about it. It sounds cool. People have said it's good. The cover is amazing. I feel like I talk about it a little bit more in my anticipated releases video if you want to go all the way back and watch that. Number 19 is Ring by Koji Suzuki. This is the book that the horror movie The Ring is based off of. If you haven't seen that movie, the basic premise is that if you watch this VHS tape, you're going to die in 7 days. Our main character is a journalist whose niece has just inexplicably died and is tied to this tape, so he decides to investigate the rumors surrounding it. I watched the Ring movie when I was a kid, probably when I was way too young, because that is one of the horror movies that still strikes fear in the very core of my heart, even though I'm sure as an adult it's not actually that scary, but it scarred my memory. And I did not know that it was based off a book until a year or two ago, and I really want to read the book. I have a burning need for this, but I think I'm gonna wait for the Halloween season for it. I'm not sure. Number 20 is Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon McGuire. This book centers around a home that's meant to care for children who have been transported to portal worlds, come back, and are now struggling to acclimate acclimate to the real world. And when I say portal worlds, think like Wonderland, Narnia, things like that. I've heard that this is a really entertaining series. I love stories that try to answer the questions of what happens to characters after, you know, the traditional plot line is over. Plus, I read the Feed series that this author wrote under their other pseudonym, Myra Grant, and I loved that series. I flew through it so fast, and I didn't know until a couple years ago that they had different pseudonyms and they had different books. And the one book by Shauna McGuire that everyone talks about is Every Heart a Doorway. Number 21 is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. When BookTube was at its peak obsession with dark academia, this was the book that everyone was talking about. I did not participate in the dark academia trend, but I don't think it's too late for me, alright? I don't care that I'm not on time for this. I think Plain Bad Heroines counts as dark academia, and I did like that book, although I know it's not for everyone, but I loved it. So I want to try more dark academia. I know next to nothing about the plot though. There's like a classic professor and a group of misfit students who, like, I don't know, fall into corruption and evil. I don't know the plot and I don't care. I'm gonna try it. And the final book, book number 22, is 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. This is another one where I care more about reading something by this author than I actually care about what book I read by this author. Every time someone mentions Murakami, it's pretty much always to say that his books are amazing. And it just so happens to be that 1Q84 is the first Murakami book that I heard about and the only one that I heard about for a while. So it makes sense for me to start here, although I'll be honest, I really don't know much about the plot of this one either. According to Goodreads, this seems to be a dual storyline book. We're following a woman who begins to notice discrepancies in the world around her and realizes that she's in a parallel universe. And in the other storyline, we're following a ghostwriter who becomes obsessed with his new project and the unusual author that he's writing it for. Somehow those storylines converge over the course of the year. And that's it. This was a bit of a journey, but I tried to keep it quick while still giving y'all a little bit of a synopsis for each book. If you have read any of the books that I've mentioned, please comment below, give me your opinions. As I mentioned, I'm easily influenced, so your opinions on a book might bump it up higher or lower on the priority list. And if you want to see more bookish content from me, make sure to subscribe. I will see you in the next one.